The weather and climate often cause concern and curiosity, but understanding the facts behind the phenomena can be a challenge. We're here to help. From the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and Illinois Public Media, welcome to Weather Realness, a weekly podcast about the skies above Illinois and the world.
I'm your host, Joseph Trujillo Falcon, assistant professor in the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. You might have heard about forensic scientists from crime dramas like CSI or Dexter. These experts use bloodstains and fingerprints to find suspects. But what if weather can be used as evidence? Whether someone slips on ice or someone's house was damaged by hail, a forensic meteorologist can settle insurance and legal disputes by reconstructing past weather events. Joining us today is Dr. Bob Rauber, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where he taught for over 38 years. During his career, Dr. Rauber taught applied meteorology and incorporated forensic meteorology into his coursework, and he has consulted on legal cases involving weather as part of that expertise. Today, he joins us to shed light on what forensic meteorology is and how it works as an overall profession. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Rauber.
I'll be glad to speak with you.
You know, this conversation is so fascinating. I've been looking forward to this episode for quite a while now, just because I've heard about this intersection of forensics and meteorology. But I'd love to learn more. Could you tell us a little bit about the profession and why forensic meteorologists are used for insurance and legal disputes?
Well, forensic meteorology involves providing expert witness testimony for an expert witness and information for any type of event that involves some sort of legal or court case where weather is a factor. So, and you can think of many things from more extreme situations like aircraft accidents to something as simple as somebody slipping on ice on a sidewalk and everywhere in between, as where the expertise of a meteorologist may be needed to clarify whether weather was an issue and whether weather conditions may have had an impact on the event that occurred.
That's fascinating. And truly, to get the full picture, whether it is something related to ice, something related to temperature, we're going to have to use a lot of data. Could you break down a little bit about what kind of data are you using in this kind of consulting work?
Well, a lot depends on the event. So, for example, some events require use of radar. For example, radar estimates of precipitation, conditions of whether it was hailing or raining or things like that. Others use data that is more simple. These are temperature, pressure, wind, and rainfall measurements at the ground. Those are typically used in a lot of cases. And one thing that is important in legal situations is that the data all have to be certified. That is, these are not data that come from somebody's backyard gauge or something, but rather they have to be official measurements, either typically made by the National Weather Service or the FAA, or with radars that are commissioned by the National Weather Service.
Dr. Rauber, I know you have had an esteemed career really as a professor, guiding students, and then, of course, really also conducting this kind of consulting work as well. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that process. What led you to do this kind of consulting work in general?
Well, it was more accidental than on purpose. One day I got a phone call from an attorney who asked if I would take on an investigation for him. I'd never done it before, but I was aware that you could do this, but it was new to me, and I thought it'd be interesting. So I said yes, and wound up doing some work for a particular case. And then I guess my name got out there because over the time, I had a few more attorneys call me. In all cases, it was somebody calling me and asking me if I'd take on a case. I never pursued a career as a forensic meteorologist. Now, there are many people who do that. That's their whole income. stream is from forensic meteorology. And in a situation like that, of course, you're starting your own business. You need to get your name out there and get your business out there. And there are websites and so on where you can advertise and places where you can uh, get yourself known to the legal profession as a potential person that could do consulting. Uh, Generally, they're looking for people who have credibility. That is, they have the degrees and they have the some experience in the field. So they're quite happy to once you have that, once you develop that reputation, of course, then you can get a business started. And some people make that their full-time profession.
If you're just joining us, this is Weather Realness, the podcast about weather and climate from Illinois Public Media and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I'm Joseph Trujillo Falcon, assistant professor in the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. We're talking about forensic meteorology with Dr. Bob Robber, professor emeritus at the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. Yeah, let's go back to that first case then, because that really is such a unique intersection here and, really just goes to show the power of applied meteorology in general. What was that first case like? And on average, for our listeners who may not be as familiar with this kind of stuff, how long does that process usually take? So when you're in a case, how long from start to finish does it go all the way through?
Well, one thing you have to understand is many of these cases never go to court. They're decided outside the courtroom. Usually, an insurance company will settle one way or another. It's very rare that any case actually makes it all the way to the courtroom. So most of the time, when you develop your analysis, you provide the lawyer with it, and then you're done. You don't know what the outcome was. And all the cases I've worked on, except for one, I have no idea what the outcome of the settlement was. Basically, you provide the information, and then if the lawyer wants to, or if the client wants to continue the process, then you would get involved in a more difficult situation. So the first case I worked on was one where this was midwinter, and a woman slipped on ice in a parking lot and fell and injured herself, and she was suing the owners of the parking lot for not clearing the ice. And so the attorney was interested in knowing when the snow fell, how much snow fell, and they're very specific. And they want to know how much snow fell in the general area. They want to know how much snow fell in the parking lot. So you have to do your best estimate on the data that's available nearest the parking lot, and say that that's what you had available. But in that case, the snow had fallen several days earlier. So, and then from what I understood, the owner did have the parking lot cleared. But as you know, in midwinter, you can't get every little sliver of ice up, and so my guess was it was probably settled some way between the parties, but I didn't know. You don't know generally unless you go to trial. You don't know that. Now, so I can, if you like, I can describe the one case I actually worked on where I did go to trial.
Yeah, no, definitely. First off, this is just so interesting. Before
Yeah,
we even dig into this next trial, I have a few questions about this icy parking lot case, as I
yeah,
would call it.
sure.
Just because, yeah, when it comes to winter precipitation, we can definitely experience various kinds in a short period of time. And some of those even transition over from like
Right.
freezing rain to sleet and snow. So for a case like this, was this a primarily snowy event, sleet event, freezing rain? Did it transition? And how does that even look like when you're trying to dig into that as a forensic meteorologist in a consulting gig?
Well, for example, the questions you have to look at was did the temperature in the daytime go above freezing? In which case you would have melt and then freeze again overnight when it gets colder. So that's the type of thing I looked at. I looked at whether, when did the snow fall? Did it melt? did it refreeze? What was the temperature at the time that the person slipped? Was it water? Was it ice? And what's the likelihood that there was ice remaining in the parking lot? Obviously, if the temperature got up to 50 degrees for 2 days before, it might have all melted off and there wouldn't have been any ice there. So you try to put together a sort of a time series of the events that occurred leading up to the time that the person slipped, and you provide the attorney with that information. There's, your best interpretation of what happened to the water and ice that remained on the parking lot.
Now, that's truly fascinating. And it just really goes to show, again, that power of applied meteorology. Here, Dr. Robert, I know we've also want to review a couple of cases here as well. And
Yeah.
so the next one, and so to our listening audience here, Dr. Robert gave us a couple of cases beforehand, and I've given them some real fun names attached to them. So we'll call this one Sunshine or Shade. Because
Yeah.
in this case, a woman tripped on a curve entering a store and claimed the sun was in her eyes. When a lawyer calls you about something like that, what's your first reaction?
Well, it's my first reaction is that's interesting. I mean, there are curbs everywhere and it's easy to trip, but this particular individual was suing the store in which she went into, and she claimed that the curb was, you know, a danger or whatever, and she couldn't see it, and she tripped. And so I guess in her testimony or pretrial testimony, she claimed that the sun was in her eyes. And so the lawyer asked me a very simple question: was the sun in her eyes? And they provided me with the geometry of the building, the so I knew where the roof lines were and things like that. The sun angle, we had to figure out the sun angle to see if the sun, if the position she was in where she tripped, whether she was in the shade or whether she was in the sunlight. And then also we had to figure out whether it was sunny that day or whether it was cloudy. So so we had to go get official satellite data to look at the cloud cover. We had to get the time of the day and the time of the year, and then calculate specifically the angle of the sun relative to the roof, and whether the a person of her height was in had their head standing tall, had sun in their face, or whether they were in shade. Uh, in that case, it was shady and it was cloudy. So, but it could have been the other way. You just, you're not trying to help, or hurt the case. What you're trying to do is provide the correct information to what the question was that the lawyer.
If you're just joining us, this is Weather Realness, the podcast about weather and climate from Illinois Public Media and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I'm Joseph Trujillo Falcon, assistant professor in the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. We're talking about forensic meteorology with Dr. Bob Robber, professor emeritus at the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. All right, Dr. Robber, let's dig into the next case here. In this one, we call it a matter of millimeters. This case hits close to home since it involves a fair right here in southern Illinois. Could you just walk us through what happened and what you were brought to do?
Sure. So in this particular case, the attorney again called me and described a situation where there was an outdoor fair in a small town in southern Illinois, where the organizers of the fair had bought an insurance policy, so that if more than 3/4 of an inch of rain fell during the time period of the fair, which was a couple hours, like 3 hours long, I think, uh, that their losses, because they'd have to shut down the fair due to a thunderstorm, was would be compensated. And so there was a washout. Thunderstorm came by, rained. The fair was washed out. And so they went to the insurance company, and the insurance company hired a meteorologist, not me, to provide an estimate of the amount of rain that fell during that period. The meteorologists that they hired come up with a total rainfall of 0.72 inches, which is slightly less than 0.75, which is 3/4 of an inch. And so, based on the information that the other meteorologist provided the insurance company denied the claim. Uh, now, there was a unofficial gauge very close to the fair that recorded an inch and a half of rain. And so the fair organizers were pretty upset by all this and hired a lawyer to represent them to try to get their insurance claim. And so the lawyer called me and asked me if I could do a similar estimate to what the other meteorologists did and come up with my estimate. And so I was given the meteorologist report as well. I mean, all that kind of information is shared back and forth between lawyers. And I noted that they used a radar estimate of the precipitation. Now, there is no gauge near this place. So, I mean, no official gauge. So there's no way to tell. In a thunderstorm, you can't use anything 5 miles away because it isn't representative. So the only real thing we had was radar. And so I happen to be a radar expert. And so one of the things I did first was look at where the radar was relative to the fair, and it turns out it was about 130 kilometers, or I don't know what, 70 miles, something like that, away from the fair. And so, because of the curvature of the Earth, radar beams get higher and higher as you go further away from the radar. And it turned out that the radar beam over the fair was about, oh, I'd say maybe a mile and a half above the fair, maybe two. And so they're really looking at the very upper part of the cloud when they made the estimate. And the upper part of the cloud is all ice, not water. And and that matters to what the radar reflectivity turns out to be. And so if you correct for that, you get a much better estimate. And so I provided a correction, in which case the rainfall was closer to that unofficial gauge. And that's what I provided to the lawyer. And I never heard of anything after that. So I don't know how it's settled. I don't know whether the fair was compensated, but I provided information that would have benefited the fair owners in that case.
If you're just joining us, this is Weather Realness, the podcast about weather and climate from Illinois Public Media and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I'm Joseph Trujillo Falcon, assistant professor in the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. We're talking about forensic meteorology with Dr. Bob Robber, professor emeritus in the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. Dr. Robert, thank you so much for sharing these cases. I've learned so much and honestly been geeking out along the way. I know this very last one here, you mentioned that the case did eventually go up the trial, and we really would love to learn a little bit more about that process. More specifically,
Sure.
what is it like to testify, and can you paint a picture of what that looks like in a courtroom?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of steps involved. The first step is, of course, you provide your report. Once your report becomes part of the official record, that's shared with the attorneys on the opposing side. And then you next go to what's called deposition. Okay, so in the deposition, this is typically done in the attorney's office. You meet with the attorney that has hired you and the attorney for the opposing side. And the attorney for the opposing side asks you questions. And this may go on for quite a while. Uh, and you basically, you're under oath when you answer these questions. You take the oath before you start. And then you answer questions, whatever the attorney asks. And one thing I learned very quickly is these attorneys know their stuff. I mean, they do their homework before they come in and ask you questions, and they they can ask whatever questions they want. You give them the best answer you can. Uh, the important thing is you're truthful and don't misrepresent the information that you have have provided. Don't speculate. You just stay with the facts. And answer the questions.
Honestly, even as a weather risk communication expert myself, what really is fascinating about this to me too is how we have to be able to communicate complex atmospheric data for a jury or a judge to understand, because of course they
Right.
might not have that atmospheric science background. And so, to contextualize this to our listening audience today, how do you transform a very complex and detailed atmospheric report into consumable findings that both the jury and judge can understand?
Yeah, well, I think uh, it's one of the problems that scientists often have is trying to communicate complex information in language that people who are not in your field can understand. And so it's something that takes a bit of thought. I find that whenever I communicate with people who are intelligent but not familiar with the field, that you need to think before you talk. And I always try to give myself a few seconds for my brain to basically think about the way I would portray this to, say, my family or to a friend, as opposed to, the guy sitting at the desk across from me that understands all the technical jargon. But avoiding jargon is the main thing, I mean, avoiding terms that are meteorological but not well understood by the public, and trying to boil it down to the essence of the question that the people are trying to understand. I mean, in the end, they're trying to learn from me what the wind speed was at that location, and that's where you need to focus your answer, because that's all that matters in that case, right? It's like really all that matters. Doesn't matter what the structure of a hurricane is, or what the way we determine it from satellite data. Unless the lawyer asks that question, then you give your best answer.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And honestly, even after hearing this episode, I feel so inspired to really look into this field. And I'm sure some of our listeners may as well be able to relate with that. So let's finish up this very awesome interview with the last question here for you. What advice would you give to anyone interested in pursuing this unique field of forensic meteorology?
Well, I think it's a very noble profession to do. It's a business, okay, and so our typically people who trained in meteorology are not trained in business. They're not trained in the whole business, whole aspect of trying to run a business. And so I would say if you're interested in doing this and you're a meteorologist, that you also look into taking a business courses, understanding the nature of advertising. You got to get your name out there, and so you need to think about where, how you're going to uh, really get your first couple of cases, get your name out there, how you're going to uh, identify yourself with the legal profession and so on. So it's really understanding meteorology is only half of it. Understanding the whole business aspect of it is the other half. And then communication. It's extremely important to learn how to communicate at a level that is where you can communicate with not only scientists but with uh, with the legal profession and with juries, because they're the ones that ultimately make a decision, and with judges too. I mean, a judge and jury, I mean, are all people who are going to listen to you, and if you can't testify at language they can understand, lawyers aren't going to be interested in you. So
For sure. And it truly shows the power of interdisciplinary science. Well,
it is.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Bob Robert. This has been such a fascinating conversation.
Well, glad to have it with you.
We've been talking with Dr. Bob Robert, Professor Emeritus at the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. I'm Joseph Trujillo Falcon, Assistant Professor in the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. Thanks for joining us on Weather Realness. Do you have a weather or climate question you want us to answer? Leave us a voicemail at 217-333-2141 or email weatherrealness@illinois.edu.